You'll note that I made mention of the relationship between St. Francis and St. Bonaventure at the beginning of Mass today. I do so because I find it to be a fascinating relationship between the two, a fascinating difference in two men, two great saints of our church. In St. Francis, obviously, you have someone who is renowned the whole world over, someone whose passionate faith built up a whole new religious order in the church, and not just a religious order, but something that took root across the world, a figure that inspires and sometimes even mystifies not only our own Western culture, but Eastern culture as well. While it is true that popular depictions of Francis have him associating with nature and animals, Franciscans know that his truest and closest association was with the cross of Christ. You'll notice even on my own vestment that this very symbol on the front of my vestment is the Franciscan cross of the crest, just so that you know how close the Franciscan spirit of what they do is close to my heart. And the example of St. Francis and St. Bonaventure, the Christian Tau, this symbol here, the Franciscan cross. St. Bonaventure is not always known the world over. Fewer people have read his words, fewer people will quote or even misquote St. Bonaventure, but he was a man with a keen intellect, a passion, and indeed even a great skill for administration. Someone who looked at the history of faith and the growing history of the Franciscans and tried to find the role of this mendicant order within the church. Francis himself, passionate, self-sacrificing, a powerful speaker, inspired hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hearts, even in his own day. And yet Francis himself was not a skilled administrator. By the time he left behind the Franciscan order at the end of his life, he was even outvoted by the members of his own community to be replaced by a new leader. It's not a condemnation on Francis. He never sought to form a religious order that would compromise many tens of thousands of men and women, but it was beyond his skill. And in a true act of poverty and prayer, while he was frustrated that he had to give away the thing that he created, God said that this now was his own act of poverty that he must enact. St. Bonaventure, coming not too terribly long after this, saw an order that was widespread throughout the world, but fractured, undisciplined, and not undisciplined for lack of caring, but undisciplined because there was nothing solid to form and guide a community. St. Bonaventure is one of the patron saints I look to for myself, being pastor. Himself a teacher and an educator. One did not need to be a shrewd businessman in order to run something in the ancient world, or I believe even today, but someone who believes and looks after certain principles, holds people accountable to those principles, does his best to live according to those principles. I really do find a lot of great inspiration from St. Bonaventure. Bonaventure, just like in our gospel today, deferred to St. Francis frequently, referred to him as the seraphic doctor, the seraphim, the rank of angels closest to the throne of God in the presence of his love. That's how much he revered St. Francis, someone who was that close to God, who sat constantly in the light of his love. It inspired Bonaventure and Clare and all the great Franciscan saints, Dominican saints, so on and so forth. Bonaventure took that inspiration from Francis and made it into a way of life for people to follow. Francis had his gifts, and Bonaventure had his. In all of those things, it's a reminder to us not to be jealous when someone else excels or exceeds at something, but rather that if they are working in the vineyard of God, to rejoice that he has called a skilled laborer to his vineyard. For ourselves to discern what it is that we can do. What are our gifts? And ask God, how may you put me to work? What work have you portioned for me? Our scripture, our history, our church, our saints teach us the common story. That those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and that those who humble themselves will be exalted. To humble ourselves means to acknowledge what I can give and to give it, and to acknowledge the goodness of others and give thanks to God.